Okay, very good. Beth?
Good morning. Welcome to our new members as well. I generally start my report with sort of the big picture of what's going on at the national level in the economy, and then narrow that down to the implications in Portland as we think about our payroll tax and what the implications are for our revenues, which are the basis of our budget. So with that, I'm going to start today with the national, what's been going on in the national market. February was another month of mixed messages. There was good news. I think we've all seen that. The stock market in early March was actually up over 60% from the low point, which was last March. If you remember a year ago, we were all worried that the financial crisis was going to take down the system. So we've come a long way from there, and that's also good news for our pension funds, because our pension funds have also recovered in part from where they were last year. Nationally, the unemployment rate was unchanged in March and February at 9.7%, but underlying that was a statistic which is good. There were 36,000 jobs lost nationally. Now, it's never good to have job losses, but that compares with the average over the past year of 650,000 jobs lost a month. So it is moving in the right direction. We also saw an increase in temporary workers and hours worked, which is, most economists believe, the first step to a recovery. And there was a surprise uptick in retail sales, and that was despite blizzards and snowstorms in the East Coast and Midwest. So all signs of perhaps a budding recovery. But the situation in employment still remains weak, nationally and here. There are almost 15 million Americans still unemployed, and a particularly bleak statistic is that of those, 4 out of 10 have been looking for work for 6 months or longer. And the economists have a statistic called underemployment, which refers to people who have had their hours cut or are working part-time when they would prefer to be working full-time, and economists estimate that nationally to be almost 17%. And yesterday we saw that existing home sales fell for the 3rd straight month, and today there was a news announcement that new home sales fell to record low levels. And the housing market has traditionally been the engine of recovery. So again, mixed messages in what's happening in the economy. In the Portland region, we got some revised data. Every year the statisticians revise the employment data and showed that our job losses here earlier in the year and late last year were actually worse than we had thought. We have been talking to you about year-over-year job losses of 57,000 and how dramatic that was. The last recession, it was only about 30,000 jobs lost. The newly revised data shows that our 3 counties at the depth of the recession lost over 65,000 jobs, which is a really staggeringly terrible statistic. The unemployment data and employment data that came out for our 3 counties yesterday, however, does show some relatively positive directional movement. The unemployment rate was lower in all 3 counties. It was close or at the same level whereas it had been a year ago. So we've seen unemployment rates over 10% in all 3 counties. It's now under 10%. In all 3. Clackamas is at 9.9, Multnomah 9.7, Washington at 9.5. Those are still really high numbers, but they're better than they've been. And while it's not good news when 10% of the population is out of work, it's the job losses that we saw last month were about 34,000 compared to 65,000 that we've been seeing monthly in the past. So what does all this mean? The reason we look at all this is what does it mean for our payroll tax collections? And a reminder to the board and for our new members, our tax collections, the data we see, always lag a quarter. So the revenues we're receiving now reflect the economic activity of the last quarter of last year. And what we've been seeing is a decline in actual receipts every quarter since this time last year. Right now, we're in the middle of the quarter, so we don't have the full data, but it looks like we're going to be about at the same level as we were at this time last year. Again, the tax rate is higher, so that means we're not, there's no real growth, we're actually a slight real decline, but the directional movement is changing for the better. So I'd now like to turn to briefly to the February operating report, which you have in your packet, the blue report. We are now 8 months into our fiscal year, and we're seeing, Trimet's results are seeing a continuation of the results that I've been talking about for the last few months. Our operating revenue remains approximately 6% under where we budgeted last year, and again, this is due to the steeper drop in employment than we had forecasted this time last year. Also, our passenger revenue is lower than budget, as Fred was mentioning, because of fewer people commuting and having money to spend for recreational activities. The operating expenses, which reflect the cuts that we made, the budget reflects the cuts we made last year, but we are fortunately 3% under budget on expenditures as well. So what that means overall year to date is that we are doing worse than budgeted, but we're within the contingency that we budgeted. And as Board Member Schweitzer had mentioned, and we talk about in Finance Committee, our budget, we need to have a balanced budget. We cannot deficit spend. So we watch very carefully where we are during the year to make, since our revenues are under, we have to make sure that our expenditures are under as well. And just noting what Fred said, the good news is that in the performance report, we are seeing rides, passenger revenue and rides increase, although peak bus ridership is still down from last year. If you look on the expenditure side, we internally look very closely at our variances every month. Obviously, if a department's running over budget, we look to see what that is and what's causing that and how we can fix it. We also look very carefully, though, at where we're under budget, because we need to be under budget to match our revenues. And when we look at areas which are running under budget, to see if that's going to continue for the next 4 months of the year. And as we've been discussing each month, the area where we're most under budget is our accessible transportation program. It's a large item, almost $50 million for the year. And so those savings, we are continuing to be under budget there, so those savings are very important to us. And if you look in the performance report stats, you'll see that total rides from Lyft and cabs are down. And in particular, the biggest savings is that we don't need as many backup cabs, which are expensive to provide the accessible transportation service. Another big department which is running under budget is bus transportation. Many components in that, but one of the biggest reasons that we're seeing us be under spending there is that personal injury, property damage claims have been less than we budgeted. We self-insure. We monitor this very carefully. It's very difficult to predict with that just because we're under budget now, we will be at the end of the year, but we are monitoring that and fortunately seeing that remain under budget. Finally, I'd like to turn to the investment report. And we see our unrestricted investments at $58 million. That's higher than where we were last month, but that's typical for February because we get an influx of payroll tax revenues at that time. As we've discussed, our unrestricted investments are sort of like our checking account. They're available when needed to meet our monthly expenditures, and they're invested primarily in the Oregon Short-Term Fund run by the state treasurer, because that offers the highest yield, and we invest as much as we can up to that. The state limits the amount that we can put in there. And then the remainder of our short-term investments are in very high-quality treasuries and agencies, which are yielding very low rates. And once again, this month, as we reported last month, world events have affected our portfolio, as we've seen the concerns about the euro and over Greece and potential default caused the euro to be questioned. There's been more global money flowing into treasuries. That means the yields have gone down and have affected Trimet's portfolio. So our overall yield on a one-year treasury is currently yielding 0.4%, and 3-month. A lot of our investments are very short because they're there to pay debt service or to pay bills, is earning about 0.1%. So I can give you the comfort that the portfolio is invested in short-term, very safe, very liquid investments, but like everyone else, they are earning virtually zero. So if there are any questions,